Hey everyone, welcome to another artwork analysis. Now, I went through a lot of animators and illustrators recently, and I figured it might be time to go back to hardcore realism. And what better way than to introduce you guys and girls on an artist that I look up to when it comes to realist techniques and and he's contemporary as well, so none of these dead old masters from 300 years ago or something. And his name is Casey Baugh. Now I apologize if I mispronounce his last name. I'll just call him Casey from now on. What makes his work good is I always say there's a misconception that realism is just copying, and there's nothing impressive about realism. But good realism is actually better than photography or copying. And the reason why is because good realists are able to replicate the human eye. Cameras kind of aren't really good for that. No matter if you take a photograph, even if you know that nothing is altered, the camera isn't experiencing what we are experiencing. And I'm going to talk about two things that separate our human eyes with cameras and why Casey Baugh is able to take his style and really create realism that is just better than photography. And that's edges and lighting. So I have two artwork just to let you know, because I feel like his black and white drawings are incredibly educational, and there's a lot to learn from both his colored work and his drawings. Of course, some of this black and whites are paintings as well. I'm not too sure which side of that this is, but I'll just go with drawing for this one. Anyways, first I want to talk about edges. So cameras, one major problem with cameras is they're not really optimized to focus like our eyes do. And a lot of amateur photographers actually have too much focus. So what I mean by that is, on default, your camera will have sharp edges for every single thing you take in the scene. So this, of course, doesn't make sense, because I want you to look at something, and maybe a pencil on the table or otherwise. And I want you to notice that everything that you don't focus on are automatically faded out, and the edges seem to be softened. This is created, again, because we are unable to focus on everything in a particular scene. Our human eyes have the ability to focus, but it also has the ability to not focus. And that is the difference between a fantastic realist painter and a camera. So I want you to take a look at some of the edges in the background. Now, let me get a good color here. You notice that, actually no, let's look at the focal point first. So you notice that the face immediately pops out because our eyes are focused on this particular person. It's as if we are standing in front of her. It's so real. And I'm sure if you go take a look at the life-size painting of this would feel incredible. It's as if you're staring into in the street, exactly as you see it. Look at the edges for here. Very sharp. There's a lot of detail, a lot of articulations, even though, as you can see here, most of these are just masterful brushstrokes. This is also one thing a lot of great realist painters do. They don't just render and airbrush everything. They are very deliberate at what they smooth or blend in normal cases, in normal terms rather, and they know what to create with brushstrokes. Casey didn't need to make more than this. He just needed a few brushstrokes and it just reads like a leather coat. It is incredible. And again, notice how many details are on the face. This creates immediate focus. If this wasn't focused, we wouldn't be able to see her eyes. Her eyes would be faded out. Now, speaking of faded out, notice the background here. Even the street paint, the paint, the lines on the street rather. Notice here as well. So notice that these are brushstrokes, but we know immediately these are cars. Because given the context of the entire scene, we only need a few brushstrokes to know that, hey, because of our familiarity of a street scene, we can assume these are cars. And of course, Casey also has masterful paintbrushes to create just the impression of cars without really over-rendering. And notice here, one thing to note is that I don't even know what that is, to be honest, but doesn't matter. It's sort of like when you focus on one thing, you don't have an idea of what everything is in detail. So when you are looking at the scene, perhaps your peripheral vision is going to be that blurry. You don't know what's there. We don't need to be worried about what's there, unless probably like if there's like a thug or something. But that's part of the idea of blind spots too. You just don't understand really what is out of your focus, and you really want to keep that in mind. And again, we can go into the edges for the lines on the road here. Compare it to, let me erase that. Compare it to even the hand. There is a slight focus shift. And notice the edges here on the hand are sharper because, again, our eyes are focused on this entire character. Meaning, given that there is distance between the hand and the whole body of this woman to the road, it makes sense for this area to be more faded. Again, masterful. Insanely masterful. And it would take a lifetime to reach this type of realism. Now let's go to Casey's drawing here, black and white. Same idea. Notice how, with our knowledge of what the background is a street scene, we know this is a car despite the fact that it's completely blurred out. Notice how there's lights here. We don't know where the lights are coming from, but we do feel the light. We don't have to really understand and have perfect focus on what the lights are. But we know there are lights, and that's good enough as it is. And of course, look at these buildings, blurred out again. But we know these are buildings given the context of the scene. He doesn't need to put more details, he doesn't need to make them sharp. What's important is this area. Self-explanatory, study Casey's work if you're really looking to contemporary realism. Now, I want to talk about the second point, lighting, while I'm on this particular drawing. Look how beautiful the lighting is. Let me tell you, subtle lighting is absolutely difficult. One of the most difficult things you can do. And Casey does it masterfully. Perfect values on the background here. We know this is where the light is coming from because the sky obviously is emitting light, and it is the lightest part of the painting. Notice how there is a beautiful silhouette going on with the character here. Everything makes sense. Look at the value range of this character and the silhouette the street creates. We can group all of these together versus the lighting of this area. Let me write it down here. There are really three different planes that I want to talk about. Of course, the sky. Number 2 is the character. Number 3 is the road. Notice how the value ranges are perfect. So for number 2, you notice that it contains the biggest mass of dark. And the reason why is because it brings her forward to the scene. It also makes sense that her range is higher because her hair is of course blonde or white and her skin is probably Caucasian. So what happens is we have a huge range between the jacket and the hair and the skin tone, which creates a sense that, hey, there's more contrast, therefore she is closer to us. Compare it to number 3. Now, you could say even the background here is a little bit contrasting as well, but it's more obscured, and of course it goes into edges too. The edges for the building here is a lot more blurred, so even if the value range is a bit farther apart, we still believe the character is closer. And of course, look at the road as well, same deal. Fantastic range of values, the lighting looks perfect, and of course you could take liberties in what your composition needs to have when it comes to value. So I wouldn't doubt if this is exactly how the lit scene looks, but Casey most likely took a bit of liberties, especially the area at the bottom here, with adding a bit more lightweight or dark weight, and just giving it a flavor that this is not just a photograph, it's a very nice drawing or painting. Really take note as to when you're doing realism, where is your lighting coming from and what are the possible values in each of those scenarios. If you are able to know which values are limited, so for instance number 2 with the character, you know because she is juxtaposed with the background lighting of the sky that any part of her face cannot contain the lightest value because she's not emitting light. She would technically and logically have to be darker than the light source. So keep that in mind when it comes to choosing your values. And of course, we'll go back to this beautiful painting. Notice how her, again, very similar lighting where her face is obscured in shadow. Notice that her ranges of values are pretty similar and dark. The only thing is her leather jacket, because it's a leather jacket, can reflect a lot of the light. So this area here, this area here, this area here, this area here helps create the leather feeling, the shininess of leather. Now notice how even though these are shiny, none of these compare with the lit areas of the car, the lighting here. Notice that even the road is lit by the light, but notice how it's still darker than the car lights, because in this particular scene we have the light sources, meaning we do not need everything. I guess everything else cannot be lighter than the light sources. It just makes sense. If you know the where the light sources are, keep the lit areas to the lightest value and keep everything else darker. It just logically makes sense. That's realism. And hopefully that makes sense. Lighting, of course, also comes down to lighting direction. Now, I won't talk about it too much, given you should get reference for the lighting direction and values, but keep that in mind. It isn't just a value range, it's also the direction of lighting, and Casey is incredible at keeping that. Even if, of course, he used photographic reference, which is not a bad thing. Anyways, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.